The rough bark bit into Hannah's wrists as the guards tightened the ropes round the massive ironwood tree. Her fingers had already started to go numb. But she refused to give Elder Park the satisfaction of seeing her wince. The ancient tree had stood here for over 200 years, its twisted branches reaching toward the alien sky like gnarled fingers. How many others had been tied to this same trunk? How many had broken under the weight of tradition? Last chance. Girl. Guard captain. Jinwoo muttered as he checked the knots. His weathered face showed no emotion, but Hannah caught the slight tremor in his voice. Even he knew this was wrong. The twin moons of Kepler were to be hung low in the purple sky, casting double shadows across the settlement of New Bizon, the larger moon, which the colonists called Grandmother, glowed pale blue through the planet's thick atmosphere. Its smaller companion, Little Sister, danced round it in a slow waltz that had mesmerized humans for 3 centuries. Elder Park smoothed his ceremonial robes and stepped closer to Hannah. His breath smelled of fermented grain wine, the kind the council members drank during their endless meetings about tradition and order. Commander Day is a good man. He owns the largest water processing plant in the northern district. Your children would never go thirsty. My children, Hannah laughed, the sound sharp in the cooling air. I'm 24 years old. I designed half the atmospheric processes keeping this colony alive. And you want to trade me like livestock because some warlord thinks he needs a pretty wife? The elder's face darkened. Commander Day is not a warlord. He maintains order. He protects us from the night crawlers and the acid storms. Without strong leaders like him, we would all perish. Hannah tested the ropes binding her wrists. Jinwoo had tied them tight, but not cruel. Maybe there was still hope in some of these people. My grandmother told me stories about Earth, about cities that touched the clouds and ships that sailed between stars. Do you think those humans worried about pretty wives and water rights? Earth abandoned us. Elder Park's voice cracked like a whip. 300 years of silence. We built this world with our own hands, our own rules. The old ways failed us. No, Hannah said quietly. We failed the old ways. The settlement spread out below the hill where the punishment tree stood. New Bizon wasn't much to look at. Just clusters of dome-shaped buildings connected by covered walkways. The architecture was practical, designed to withstand the planet's fierce storms and the occasional attack from the indigenous creatures that roam the wilderness. But it had character. Built by people who refused to give up even when the universe seemed determined to kill them. Hannah had grown up in those domes, learning to repair atmospheric scrubbers and water recyclers before most children learned to read. Her parents had died in a mining accident when she was 15, crushed in a tunnel collapse while searching for rare earth minerals. The colony needed those minerals to keep their technology running, but it also needed engineers. Like Hannah, too, make sense of the equipment their ancestors had brought from Earth. The girl stays here until dawn. Elder Park announced to the small crowd that had gathered to watch, if she survives the night. Perhaps she'll reconsider her foolish pride. Hannah knew what that meant. The night crawlers emerged after dark, drawn by the scent of warm blood and the electromagnetic fields generated by human nervous systems. They looked like enormous centipedes with crystalline shells that reflected the moonlight. Most were only as long as a person's arm, but the colony records spoke of specimens over 3 meters in length. This is murder. She called out as Elder Park walked away. You know the crawlers hunt at night. The tree has protective wards. He replied without turning round. Old Earth technology, still functional. You might survive if you stay very still and very quiet. The crowd began to disperse as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Some of the younger colonists looked back at Hannah with expression she couldn't quite read. Shame, anger, fear. It was hard to tell in the dim light. Jinwoo was the last to leave. He paused at the base of the hill and looked up at her. "My daughter admires your work on the Eastern processes. She wants to be an engineer too. Then teach her to think for herself." Hannah replied, "Don't let them trade her away, like I'm being traded." The god captain nodded once and disappeared into the shadows. Alone now, Hannah tested her bonds again. The ironwood bark was rough against her back, but the tree felt solid and somehow comforting. It had weathered countless storms, survived attacks by creatures that could dissolve metal with their acid breath, and still stood strong. Maybe she could do the same. The first strange lights appeared just as the last glow faded from the western horizon. They flickered between the trees like fireflies, but too bright and too organized to be natural. Hannah held her breath and watched them dance through the forest, moving closer with each passing minute. Something was coming. The humming sound started as barely a whisper in the wind, like the distant buzz of the colony's power generators. But this was different. This sound had rhythm, purpose, and it was getting closer. Hannah pressed her back against the ironwood tree and strained her eyes toward the forest. The strange lights she'd seen earlier were now moving in formation, weaving between the massive trunk trees that dominated this part of Kepler to be. A night crawler skittered past the base of the hill, its crystalline shell catching the moonlight. The creature paused, sensing something unusual in the air, then darted away into the undergrowth. Even the planet's predators knew something was coming. The humming grew louder, and suddenly the tree line exploded with blue-white light. A figure emerged from the shadows, riding something that defied every law of physics Hannah thought she understood. The mount looked like a cross between a motorcycle and a bird of prey, its sleek hull gleaming with an inner light that pulsed in time with the rider's heartbeat. But it wasn't touching the ground. It glided 3 feet above the grass, leaving no tracks, making no sound except that haunting mechanical hum. The rider wore form-fitting armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. A helmet covered her face, but Hannah could see the faint outline of human features beneath the transparent visor. As the strange vehicle drew closer, Hannah noticed symbols etched into its hull, characters she didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar, like half-remembered dreams from childhood. "You're not from here," Hannah whispered as the stranger dismounted with fluid grace. The hovering machine settled to the ground with a soft sigh, its glow dimming to a gentle pulse. The rider reached up and removed her helmet, revealing a woman's face. Asian features, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, eyes that held depths of experience Hannah couldn't begin to imagine. She looked maybe 30 years old, but something in her expression suggested she'd seen lifetimes of wonders and horrors. "No," the woman replied, pulling a device from her belt that hummed with contained energy. The tool looked like nothing Hannah had ever seen. Part cutting laser, part medical scanner, part something else entirely. "I'm Captain Yuna of the Terran Fleet. Earth sent us to find you." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. Earth, the mythical home world, the place of legends and bedtime stories. The planet that had supposedly abandoned them centuries ago when the Great Silence began. Earth. Hannah's voice cracked. "But we've been alone for 312 years, 4 months. And 16 days, Captain Yuna said, slicing through the ropes with surgical precision. The energy blade cauterized the fiber as it cut, leaving no frayed ends. "We know, we've been looking for you for the last 50 years. Hannah's legs nearly gave out as the circulation returned to her hands. Captain Yuna caught her easily, supporting her weight while she regained her balance. The captain's armor felt warm to the touch, like it was alive somehow. "Your people were never forgotten." Yuna continued, helping Hannah toward the hovering vehicle. The Terran Reclamation Fleet was founded specifically to find and reconnect with lost colonies. "You're the 47th world we've contacted. 47th. Hannah stared at the machine as Captain Una activated its controls with touches that seemed more like caresses. How many of us are out there? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Humanity spread far and wide before the great collapse cut off interstellar communication. But we rebuilt, we remembered, and we came looking for our lost children. The vehicle hummed to life, lifting smoothly from the ground. Hannah gripped the handholds as they rose above the hill, the punishment tree falling away beneath them. From this height, she could see the entire colony spread out like a collection of glowing poles in the darkness. Her home looked so small from up here, so fragile against the vast wilderness of an alien world. How is this possible? She asked, watching the ground rush past below them. The technology we have left can barely keep our life support running. Captain Una smiled, and for the first time, Hannah saw warmth in those experienced eyes. Your ancestors were survivors, not explorers. They took farming equipment and mining tools, atmospheric processors and water purifiers. We took different things, weapons, starship engines, quantum computers, and we never stopped building. They soared toward the forest as alarm bells began ringing in the settlement behind them. Elder Park's voice echoed through the colony's public address system, demanding that all citizens remain in their homes and report any unusual activity. But Hannah could see lights coming on in windows throughout New Bizen. People were curious. People were scared. People were hope-hungry after 3 centuries of isolation. They'll come after us, Hannah warned. Let them try, Captain Una replied, as if summoned by her words. The night sky lit up with new stars. 3 massive shapes descended through the atmosphere, their hulls gleaming with the same blue-white light as the captain's vehicle. The ships were enormous, each one larger than the entire settlement of New Bizen. They moved with impossible grace for objects of such size, defying gravity like it was merely a suggestion. The Terran fleet doesn't abandon its people, Captain Una said as they approached the tree line. Not anymore. Behind them, Commander Day's security forces were already mobilizing, their primitive vehicles racing up the hill toward the punishment tree. But they were chasing ghosts now. The tree stood empty, its ancient bark unmarked by the drama that had played out in its shadow dot in the forest ahead. Captain Una's ship waited among the towering trunk trees, its hull almost invisible until they were close enough to touch it. The craft was sleek and predatory, designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort. But to Hannah, it looked like the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It looked like freedom. Commander Day's hunting party crashed through the underbrush like a pack of wild animals, their torches creating dancing shadows that made the ancient trees look like twisted monsters. 20 of his best men followed behind him, armed with plasma rifles and stun batons, their boots crushing the luminescent fungi that carpeted the forest floor. The bioluminescent organisms pulsed angry red as they died, painting the hunting party in an eerie crimson glow. Fan out, Day barked, his voice echoing off the massive trunk trees. She can't have gone far on foot. But as they pushed deeper into the forest, the truth became impossible to ignore. 50 meters ahead, nestled between 2 colossal trees whose branches formed a natural cathedral, sat something that shouldn't exist. Captain Una's ship waited in the shadows, sleek and impossible, like something torn from the pages of the old Earth stories their grandparents used to tell. The craft was perhaps 30 meters long, its hull a seamless blend of curves and angles that seemed to shift depending on the viewing angle. No visible engines, no exhaust ports, no signs of the crude chemical propulsion their colony ships had used. Instead, the entire surface hummed with barely contained energy, generating a field that made the air shimmer like heat waves. Kyung, Day's youngest soldier, stopped so suddenly that the man behind him nearly knocked him over. Commander, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their heavy breathing. "What is that thing? Impossible," Day muttered, but his hand moved instinctively to the sidearm at his hip. The weapon suddenly felt primitive, almost laughable. Like bringing a stone knife to a gunfight. A hatch opened in the ship's side with a sound like silk tearing. No grinding of gears. No hiss of hydraulics. Just a whisper-quiet movement that revealed an interior glowing with soft blue light. Captain Una emerged first, her movements fluid and confident. She'd removed her helmet, and in the torchlight, her face looked almost serene. Hannah appeared beside her, no longer the frightened woman they'd tied to the punishment tree. Standing next to the Terran officer, she looked taller somehow, more substantial, like she'd remembered something about herself that had been sleeping for years. "Surrender the woman," Day shouted, raising his plasma rifle. The weapon whined as it charged, its energy cell glowing bright orange in the darkness. "She belongs to us." Captain Una stepped forward. And suddenly there was something in her hands that hadn't been there a moment before. The weapon looked like it had been grown rather than built, its organic curves matching the flow of her armor. It hummed with the same energy as her ship, casting dancing patterns of light across the forest floor. "She belongs to herself," Captain Una said, her voice carrying easily across the distance between them. There was no anger in her tone. No threat, just absolute certainty, like she was stating a law of physics. Day's rifle wavered slightly. Up close, the alien technology was even more intimidating. The captain's weapon didn't just glow. It seemed to bend light on itself, creating visual distortions that hurt to look at directly. "You don't understand," Day said, desperation creeping into his voice. "This is our world, our laws, our way of life. You have no right to interfere. Your way of life." Captain Una tilted her head, and for a moment she looked genuinely curious. "Tell me, Commander, how many engineers has your colony produced in the last decade?" The question caught Day off guard. "What does that have to do with anything, everything?" Una gestured toward Hannah. "This woman designed atmospheric processes that increased your air quality by 30%. She developed water filtration systems that eliminated bacterial contamination in the Eastern District. She created early warning sensors for acid storms that have saved hundreds of lives, and you were going to trade her away like livestock because she refused an unwanted marriage. She has duties. Responsibilities." Yes, Captain Una agreed. To herself, to her potential, to the future of human knowledge and achievement. Not to some petty warlord who thinks strength gives him the right to own people. High above, the clouds began to part with unnatural precision, as if invisible hands were drawing curtains aside. 3 massive shapes descended through the gap, their hulls gleaming with starlight and something more. The ships were enormous, each one easily 5 times the size of the original colony vessels that had brought humans to Kepler for it to be, but they moved like living things, adjusting their positions with minute course corrections that spoke of incredible technological sophistication. The lead vessel was a kilometer long, its hull covered in what looked like scales that shifted from silver to blue to deep purple as the light hit them. Weapons ports lined its flanks, but they remained sealed. This wasn't an invasion fleet. It was something far more impressive, a rescue mission. Your colony is under the protection of Earth, Captain Una announced, and her voice somehow reached every corner of the settlement through hidden speakers that must have been deployed while they talked. The sound carried perfectly, reaching the sleeping children in the southern districts and the night shift workers in the mining complex. "You are not alone anymore." The words seemed to hang in the air like a physical presence. Day's men looked up at the ships, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. These weren't the crude transports that had brought their ancestors to this world. These were vessels built by a civilization that had continued to grow and evolve while the colonies struggled just to survive. "This changes nothing," Day said. But his voice had lost its commanding edge. "We've survived for 300 years. Without Earth's help, we don't need." The sound of weapons hitting the ground interrupted him. One by one, his soldiers were laying down their arms. Kyung was the first, his plasma rifle clattering against a fallen log. Then Sergeant Mensu. Then the others. They stared up at the ships overhead with the expressions of people seeing gods walk among mortals. "We're going home," one of them whispered. "This is home." They spun round, his face flushed with rage and something that might have been fear. "This world, this life, we built it with our own hands." "You built a prison," Captain Yuna corrected, gently. "But prisons can be torn down. People can be freed. Societies can evolve." The largest ship was directly overhead now, so close that its hull blocked out the stars. Hannah could see details in its construction that made her engineer's mind reel. Energy conduits that pulsed like arteries, hull plates that seemed to repair themselves even as she watched. Technologies that her colony's brightest minds couldn't even begin to understand, and yet it was undeniably human. The proportions, the design philosophy, the way form followed function, it all spoke of human hands and human minds, just centuries more advanced than anything on Kepler for to be. "What happens now?" Hannah asked, though she suspected she already knew. The answer, Captain Yuna smiled, and in that expression was the promise of a future beyond anything the colony had dared to imagine. "Now," she said, "we go home." The colony split into 3 factions overnight, like a crystal cracking under pressure. By dawn, barricades had appeared throughout New Bizen, and the careful order that had held the settlement together for generations lay in ruins. Commander Day's traditionalists moved first, seizing the government complex before the sun cleared the eastern mountains. They welded shut the main entrances and set up plasma cannon emplacements on the rooftop. Their weapons trained on the landing pads where the Terran shuttles had touched down. Day himself stood at the command center's main window, watching the chaos unfold in the streets below with cold satisfaction. "Let them see what their precious freedom brings," he told his lieutenant, Sergeant Wook. "Chaos, disorder, the breakdown of everything we've built." But even as he spoke, Doubt gnawed at his confidence. Half his security force had deserted during the night, and many of those who remained looked uncertain. They kept glancing up at the Terran ships hanging in the sky like metal moons, their hulls gleaming with technologies that made the colony's best equipment seem like stone. Tools dot in the main square, the progressives had erected their own kind of barricade. Not walls of metal and concrete, but circles of chairs and tables dragged from homes and businesses. Children played between the makeshift structures while their parents debated the future in voices th. Ad grew more excited with each passing hour. Jasu, the colony's head librarian, had brought out boxes of old books, documents from the first settlement days that most people had forgotten existed. "Look at this," she called out, holding up a yellowed manual. "Instructions for quantum communicators. We had the technology to talk to Earth 300 years ago. What happened to it?" "The elders said it was broken beyond repair," replied Do Min, a young atmospheric technician who worked with Hannah. "But maybe they just didn't want us asking questions." The third faction, the Terran Mediators, had established their base in the old community center. Admiral Minho, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, moved between the arguing groups like a patient grandfather trying to settle a family dispute. His staff consisted of specialists in colonial integration, psychologists who understood the trauma of isolation, and engineers who could help rebuild not just technology but entire ways of thinking. We can't force change. Admiral Minho explained to Captain Yuna as they watched the chaos from the center's main window. History is full of societies that collapsed when change came too quickly. They have to choose it themselves, at their own pace. Captain Yuna frowned, her hand resting on the hilt of her energy weapon. And what if they choose wrong? What if Day's faction wins and decides to reject everything we're offering? Then we respect their decision and leave them in peace, Minho replied. Freedom includes the freedom to make mistakes. But the real drama was playing out in the square, where Hannah had become something she never expected to be, a leader. Standing on a makeshift platform built from storage crates, she addressed a crowd that grew larger with each passing hour. Workers from the mining complex, teachers from the education center, even some of Elder Park's former supporters had come to listen. I know you're scared, Hannah said, her voice carrying clearly in the thin morning air. Change is frightening. The unknown is terrifying. But look round you. Look at what fear has made of our lives. She gestured toward the government complex, where Day's weapons remained trained on the square. We live in a world where a woman can be tied to a tree for refusing marriage, where asking questions is seen as dangerous, where new ideas are crushed before they can grow. Is this really the legacy we want to leave our children? Young faces looked up at her with something she hadn't seen in years. Hope, Mira. Barely 16 and already showing the mechanical aptitude that might make her an engineer. Raised her hand. What's it like out there? She asked. Among the stars. Hannah smiled, remembering Captain Yuna's words. Bigger than we ever imagined. There are cities that float in the clouds of gas giants, colonies built inside hollowed-out asteroids, worlds where the oceans glow with bioluminescent life forms, and humans everywhere, building, exploring, discovering things that would have seemed like magic to our ancestors. But what about us? Called out Hyunwoo, an older man who ran one of the hydroponic farms. What place do we have in that universe? We're just farmers and miners. Simple people, simple. Hannah laughed, but not unkindly. You've kept an entire civilization alive on an alien world for 3 centuries. You've adapted Earth crops to grow in foreign soil. You've learned to read the patterns of storms that would kill anyone from Earth in minutes. You've raised children who've never seen their ancestral home but still carry its dreams in their hearts. As she spoke, more Terran shuttles descended from the ships overhead. These weren't military vessels like Captain Yuna's fighter, but transport craft designed for comfort and wonder. Their hulls were transparent in places, allowing passengers to see the stars during flight. Landing ramps extended like welcoming arms, and soft music drifted from their interiors. But it was the passengers that truly amazed the watching colonists. Men and women in clothes that seemed to shimmer with their own light stepped onto the landing pads. Some carried devices that projected holographic displays into the air. Others wore what looked like jewelry, but were clearly sophisticated computers. And all of them moved with the confidence of people who had never known the fear of scarcity or isolation. We are descendants of explorers who crossed the void between stars, Hannah continued, her voice rising with passion. We are not meant to live in chains, not chains of tradition, not chains of fear, not chains of small thinking that says this is all we can ever be. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Hannah could see the exact moment when something fundamental shifted. It was like watching ice crack on a frozen lake. The sound barely audible, but the implications enormous. Elder Park appeared at the edge of the square, no longer wearing his ceremonial robes, but simple work clothes. His face looked older than Hannah remembered, carved with lines of worry and something that might have been regret. I was wrong. he said, his voice barely carrying to the platform. I was so afraid of losing what we had that I forgot we could gain something better. The old ways were crumbling, and something new was being born. In the distance, the Terran ships hummed with patient energy, waiting to see what choice humanity would make. Commander Day made his final stand at the terraforming station like a cornered animal. His eyes wild with the desperation of a man watching. His world crumbled. The massive facility hummed round him, its quantum processors working tirelessly to maintain the delicate atmospheric balance that kept New Bizon habitable. Without these machines, the colony would suffocate in less than 6 hours as the planet's natural atmosphere poisoned every living thing. Stay back, he screamed at the Terran soldiers who had surrounded the building. His finger hovered over the master shutdown switch, a simple red button that could doom 30,000 people. I'll do it. I swear I'll do it. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the chaos in the streets below. Terran shuttles moved like silver birds between the settlement's dome buildings, their anti-gravity engines creating ripples in the air that made everything shimmer. Colonists lined up eagerly to board the craft, carrying hastily packed belongings and children who stared in wonder at the alien technology. But it was the larger ships that truly dominated the sky. The Terran fleet had grown overnight, reinforcements arriving through fold space jumps that lit up the horizon like miniature suns. Massive cargo vessels disgorged construction robots that began improving the colony's infrastructure with impossible speed. Medical ships deployed healing nanobots that cured diseases the colonists had lived with for generations. And through it all, the flagship hung like a metal cathedral in the clouds, its hull covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as you watched them. Day, this has gone far enough. Admiral Minho's voice crackled through the station's communication system. The Terran leader sounded tired, like a man who had seen too many worlds tear themselves apart over the promise of something better. You're talking about murdering your own people. They're not my people anymore. Day slammed his fist against the control panel, causing warning lights to flash across the monitoring systems. They've been corrupted by alien promises. Seduced by technology they don't understand. This isn't humanity anymore, it's something else. Wearing our face, the control room door burst open with a hiss of hydraulics, and Hannah stepped through accompanied by two Terran Marines. But it was the sight of Hannah herself that made Day step back in shock. Gone was the frightened woman he'd tried to trade away. Like property, this Hannah wore form-fitting Terran clothing that seemed to respond to her movements, its fabric shifting colors to match her mood. Neural interface nodes glowed softly at her temples, connecting her directly to the station's computer systems. You would kill everyone rather than lose control, she asked, her voice eerily calm as she advanced toward him across the control room. Data streams flowed behind her eyes, visible through the interface nodes as she processed information at superhuman speed. The changes in her were subtle but unmistakable. Her movements had become more precise, her reflexes faster, her awareness expanded beyond normal human limits. The Terrans had offered her something Day couldn't understand: evolution itself. Look at yourself, he snarled, raising his sidearm. With shaking hands, you're not even human anymore. They've turned you into some kind of machine. I'm more human than I've ever been, Hannah replied, and there was profound sadness in her voice. I can see the quantum fluctuations in the atmospheric processes. I can feel the electromagnetic pulse of every living heart in this colony. I can process calculations that would take your best computers hours to complete, and all of it makes me more aware of how precious life is, not less. She gestured toward the shutdown switch, and Day realized with growing horror that she was bypassing his control systems through pure thought. The station's computers were responding to her neural commands, rerouting power flows and establishing backup protocols that would prevent him from causing any real damage. Every circuit, every power coupling, every safety system in this facility. She continued, her interface nodes pulsing brighter as she worked. I helped design them. I know them better than you know your own heartbeat. Did you really think you could threaten them? Better death than surrender. Day snarled. But his words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Captain Yuna appeared behind him like a ghost. Her stealth armor finally deactivating to reveal her presence. Her weapon was trained on his back. But her expression was more pitying than threatening. That's not the human way, she said softly. Humans adapt. Humans grow. Humans choose life over death, hope over fear, tomorrow over yesterday. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Then Sergeant Wook, Day's most loyal soldier, slowly lowered his weapon. I can't do this. Commander, he said, his voice breaking. My daughter is out there. My wife. I won't be part of murdering them. One by one. Day's remaining followers laid down their arms. These were people who had served him faithfully for years. But loyalty had limits when faced with genocide. They looked at their commander with expressions of disgust and betrayal, finally seeing him for what he had become. Day's hand fell away from the shutdown switch as the last of his support crumbled. He seemed to age decades in seconds, the weight of his failures pressing down on him like a physical force. 3 days later, the colony held its first free election in 3 centuries. The vote wasn't even close. By an overwhelming majority, the people of New Bizen chose to rejoin the greater human community while keeping their unique traditions, the ones that celebrated life rather than controlling it. They would maintain their connection to the land, their respect for hard work and practical solutions, their tight-knit family structures. But they would abandon the rigid hierarchies, the arranged marriages, the fear of change that had kept them prisoners in their own home. Hannah stood once more beneath the ironwood tree. But now, as the colony's newly elected liaison to the stars, the ancient trunk looked somehow smaller now. No longer a place of punishment, but just another part of the landscape. Captain Yuna's ship waited nearby, its hull gleaming in the light of the setting sun, ready to search for more lost worlds that needed reconnection with the human family. Thank you, Hannah said, though the words seemed inadequate for everything that had changed. Thank yourself, Captain Yuna replied, removing her helmet to reveal a genuine smile. You chose freedom when it mattered most. You stood up to tyranny when it would have been easier to submit. You became the leader your people needed, even when you didn't know they needed one. The stars beckoned overhead, no longer distant and cold, but warm with the promise of reunion. Somewhere out there, other colonies waited to be found. Other humans lived in isolation, not knowing that they were part of something larger, something magnificent, and Hannah would help find them. One world at a time, the night crawlers emerged from their hiding places as darkness fell, their crystalline shells catching the light from the Terran ships, but they no longer seemed threatening. They were just another part of this world's ecosystem, beautiful in their own alien way. Like everything else on Kepler-4 for it to be, they had found their place in the greater tapestry of life. Hannah touched the bark of the ironwood tree one last time, then walked toward the ship that would carry her to the stars. Behind her, New Bizen glowed. With new lights, its people finally free to reach for horizons they had only dreamed of. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and humanity was ready to explore it all. The end.